This presentation is about two people and an elephant. The two people are Jenny Rivera and Rowan Wilson. They're both people in responsible positions, hopefully, who allow bizarre ideology to overtake their common sense. And I'll tell you who they are in a minute. But first, let me tell you about Happy the elephant. Happy is 49 years old. She's lived in the Bronx Zoo for 48 years and lived 1 year of her life in the wild of Asia. She's healthy and well-fed. There's a man named James Breheny, the director of the Bronx Zoo, who claims that his mission in life is to protect the wild animals under his care. An organization which calls itself the Non-Human Rights Project, NRP, is a not-for-profit organization that characterizes its mission as seeking to establish that at least some non-human animals are legal persons entitled to fundamental rights, including bodily integrity and bodily liberty. In furtherance of this mission, petitioner the Non-Human Rights Project, commenced myriad lawsuits in New York and other states on behalf of chimpanzees and elephants, arguing that these non-human animals are legal persons being unlawfully confined, and as such they are entitled to the remedy of the Writ of Habeas Corpus. Now, NRP sued Mr. Breheny, the director of the Bronx Zoo, and others to claim that the New York state courts should issue a writ of habeas corpus, which means in Latin, quote, you bring the body, unquote, to give Happy the elephant liberty from the imprisonment of the Bronx Zoo. Well, in a 26-page opinion, Janet DeFiore, Chief Justice of the New York Court of Appeals, wrote for the majority of the 5 of the 7 justices that an animal, despite it being a sentient being with feelings and emotions, cannot enjoy the protection of a writ of habeas corpus because that legal right only applies to persons, at least since the time of the Magna Carta in medieval England in 1215. Extending that right to Happy the elephant to challenge her confinement at a zoo, quote, would have an enormous destabilizing impact on modern society, unquote. And granting legal personhood in a case like this would affect how humans would interact with animals according to the majority opinion. And it said, quote, indeed, followed to its logical conclusion, such a determination would call into question the very premises underlying pet ownership, the use of service animals, and the enlistment of animals in other forms of work. Well, what you really need to consider, however, are the two people who at least claim to be sentient beings, who are the ones who wrote the dissenting opinion and actually voted that Happy the elephant should win her liberty and that the Bronx Zoo should set her free. They are Justice Rowan Wilson and Justice Jenny Rivera, who wrote 60 and 28-page dissenting opinions respectively and actually argued that any thinking animal should not have any infringement of its liberty. Justice Wilson tried to explain that we should have a loose definition of human because a century ago we had pygmies on display at the World Fair in St. Louis, including a man named Oda Benga, who was unlawfully imprisoned so that he could be on display at the Monkey House at the exhibition. Eventually, he was transferred to the same Bronx Zoo, which has displayed, or incarcerated, Happy the elephant. Justice Rivera wrote in her dissenting opinion, quote, her captivity is inherently unjust and inhumane. It is an affront to a civilized society, and every day she remains a captive, a spectacle for humans. We too are diminished. And that's precisely the reason, however, that we have animal rights laws in both the United States and even in the state of New York. The New York legislature has already determined that issue, and so has the United States Congress in its numerous animal rights laws and the regulatory framework established under the United States Department of Agriculture. That's where I have to tell my interest arises. I sympathize with Happy the elephant. That's why I support the idea that we shouldn't treat her with cruelty. But I don't support two concepts. First, I don't support the idea that a judge sitting in a black robe has the right to overturn 10 centuries of established laws and societal norms that non-humans don't have human legal rights. Second, and most importantly, I vehemently oppose the idea that judges can just make up new laws to recast society's norms and values in their personal conception rather than that behind tens of thousands of years of moral practice and beliefs, a millennium of legal precedent, and the American concept of separation of powers under which it's legislators that write new laws and courts are merely there to enforce them. The Non-Human Rights Project wants to make an end run around people's laws and the manner in which we have created a consensus how to organize society, and in the courts of law, people's law controls, not the law of the jungle, even if the sentient being swinging from the tree and brandishing a wooden club happens to be wearing a black robe.